Would you die for your country? The answer is yes. Anyone would, but the given few who don't want to. What if you belong to a culture that deemed you an enemy to the nation? If you didn't die for your country, God forbid, this day ever comes, but picture yourself in a culture where suicide is an expression of honor, courage, and loyalty. But when death stares at you, will you look back at it? Well, this is what a kamikaze was supposed to do during the Second World War. Coming back alive, or better yet, surviving the war, meant these soldiers didn't do enough for their country, Japan. This was such a shame for these kamikazes that they were basically removed from the society and were tagged harsh words like cowards, disloyal, and a disgrace to their family. Such an ill fate if you ask me, but there were around 1,000 fortunate kamikazes who did complete their mission of killing themselves and took with them upwards to 10,000 enemies that included the military, air force, and the navy. But research yielded positive news when it was discovered that only a mere 18% of these kamikaze attacks were successful. Although the body count would be in the thousands, it was relatively smaller. But a mere 19% is not what the Japanese army general would appreciate. In this episode, we're going to look at the tragic fate these kamikaze pilots faced if they returned to Japan after a long month at war. Japan, 1944 to 45. Now, becoming a human bomb wasn't as unusual as you'd think. It was likely the worst case scenario where one had to give up their life for their comrades or just because they knew the lengths one could go on the other side. But unlike Japan, it wasn't planned. Soldiers likely did it as the last resort, just because they had no other way to escape and zero chances of survival, and well, death was sweeter than the torture inflicted upon prisoners of war. If one soldier was to go down, he could at least take 10 with him by doing so. Oh, and it wasn't only men. Anyone on the battleground prepared to become a kamikaze if the situation turned against them. Even women soldiers. Well, for them, things could go very bad if they're caught. For instance, this female sniper shooting German soldiers on the Eastern Front near Novgorod was wounded and out of ammo. While she waited for the German soldiers to take her into custody, she took a grenade and waited for them, and when they arrived, she sacrificed herself, taking her enemies with her. But that's only one from a couple of incidents. Whenever suicide attacks are mentioned, Japan is the next word that comes to our mind. Japan was strong during the war, but by 1944, it was getting obvious that Japan was on the verge of losing the Second World War. But the Japanese leaders were not one to give up. While Japan was losing, the United States and allies were overpowering by the day. This wasn't good for Japan economically, but they thought that they could still offer a peace treaty and avoid an invasion, if they could at least even the odds of winning by taking as many lives as possible to be able to make a reasonable negotiation. But the Japanese were unaware of the elephant in the room. First, the Allies were invading Japanese homelands regardless of the cost, and the Americans were on the verge of creating the atom bomb. They began organizing an entire mob of men and women into suicide corps. They called them the Divine Wind or Kamikaze. This was in the memory of the Divine Wind that destroyed an army of Mongols led by Emperor Kublai Khan twice. The Japanese thought it was the gods, and so this typhoon of exploding people was called Kamikaze and their lost hope. I mean, during the mid-1900s, the US Navy in the Pacific was 5 times larger than that of Japan. In fact, the US has the largest navy all around the globe. They also had allies with other powerful countries like Great Britain, Australia, Holland, and now from this we understand that Japan had no chance of winning the war at all. And even if there was a sliver of hope for Japan, it was going to get crossed once the US naval forces in the Atlantic Ocean shift to the Pacific once Hitler was defeated. On the other hand, by the early months of 1945, the Japanese Navy was destroyed, and while the submarines were still at a point of concern, it wouldn't be for long enough. The Japanese merchant fleet was almost non-existent as they were already sinking to the bottom. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in late October 1944 marked the culmination of the Japanese Imperial Navy's final stand, often referred to as its last gasp. With the daring strategy, the Japanese concentrated their full naval might in a desperate bid for a decisive victory. Their ultimate goal was to thwart the Allies' efforts to reclaim the Philippines while inflicting significant damage upon the Allied fleet. Despite initial estimations of a closely contested battle, several key factors such as the remarkable valor displayed by the US sailors of Task Force Taffy 3 and miscalculations made by the Japanese led to a devastating defeat for the Japanese forces. The outcome of the battle proved catastrophic for the Japanese due to these factors. Prior to the battle, a significant number of Japanese officers and pilots reached a strategic decision. They concluded that deliberately crashing their planes into Allied ships would be a more effective tactic than trying to evade the extensive gunfire from both the ships and the numerous Allied planes. By maintaining high speeds of over 300 miles per hour without the need to slow down for maneuvering, these pilots could maximize the impact of their planes loaded with sizable bombs and aviation fuel. They believed that this approach would prove more effective than engaging in dogfights while attempting to reach the Allied ships. Furthermore, it's important to note that by this stage of the war, a significant portion of the Japanese pilots consisted of inexperienced young individuals. The more seasoned and skilled Japanese pilots had largely been eliminated by American forces. Tragically, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the casualties were substantial for the U.S. Navy. The Santee lost 71 sailors, while the Suwannee suffered the loss of 107 sailors, with hundreds more wounded in the intense fighting. When the American forces prepared to invade the Japanese island of Okinawa in April 1945, the Japanese Imperial Army had undertaken extensive efforts to organize and recruit thousands of kamikaze pilots. Initially, many individuals willingly joined the ranks of the kamikaze, embracing the nation of sacrificing their lives for the country. However, as stories of the harsh conditions and brutal treatment during their flight training began to circulate, a growing number of kamikaze pilots were coerced into this role. Despite the forced nature of their involvement, they were still portrayed as glorious volunteers by the Japanese authorities. It is true that a significant number of kamikaze pilots held a genuine eagerness to sacrifice their lives for Japan and its emperor. They embraced the belief that their ultimate sacrifice would serve their country, protect their families, and preserve their cherished way of life. Even among those who may have initially harbored some reluctance, there was a sense of pride in the role they were fulfilling, knowing that they were making a profound sacrifice in service to their nation and its values. While many kamikaze pilots willingly embraced their sacrificial role, it's important to acknowledge that a considerable number sought to avoid recruitment by the armed secret police who scoured Japanese cities for young volunteers. Contrary to the myth of always being one-way missions, kamikaze pilots sometimes encountered insignificant targets like freighters or repair vessels. Some pilots returned to base to make repeated attempts, hoping to find larger enemy ships. However, excessive returns were met with severe consequences, including execution. Inexperienced pilots often failed to locate targets, either running out of fuel or getting lost over the vast ocean. The Battle of Okinawa in April 1945 marked the pinnacle of kamikaze involvement in the war, with significant efforts from these pilots. The Allied fleet amassed an extraordinary number of ships during the Battle of Okinawa, including 18 battleships, 39 aircraft carriers, 177 destroyers and destroyer escorts, 27 cruisers, and numerous support vessels. Hindsight reveals that the Japanese were unaware of the Americans' unwavering determination to invade Japan and the development of a super weapon. Even considering the ratio of kamikaze pilots to the vast number of ships and thousands of Allied aircraft in the fleet, the Japanese had little chance of success, especially considering the difficulty of successfully striking a target. Nevertheless, Allied veterans of the battle often regarded the kamikaze as the most terrifying threat they faced, as they defied conventional expectations by relentlessly advancing at tremendous speeds, disregarding the heavy barrage of gunfire. The Japanese employed challenging tactics such as diving from high altitudes or skimming the waves to target the hulls of larger ships, further increasing the danger they posed. During the Battle of Okinawa, the kamikaze targeted aircraft carriers, battleships, and cruisers, but these heavily defended ships sustained minimal damage. Instead, the kamikaze primarily struck escort and support ships. While the kamikaze inflicted significant casualties, it did not decisively alter the outcome, leading to the realization that an invasion of mainland Japan would be excessively costly. The decision to use atomic bombs followed suit. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Have a good day.